Hey y'all, we're climbing the labyrinth. It's time. It's been a while. Some busyness going on around here, so let's dive right in. Today is a non-political, non-denominational topic. It's a Bible one. So as I've been preaching through things here, we have been going through the book 1 Peter. So the epistle to 1 Peter as a congregation, and once you get to the middle of the book, then like the weird stuff starts to come in, or the things that we don't like to talk about. So we just finished talking about the submission passages, and then we moved into the suffering passages. But the part that I did not touch on Sunday, you can go and search FRC's YouTube page to watch the full thing if you really want to, but is the weird passage about Noah and imprisoned spirits and all that weird stuff. So I want to dive into some of this stuff because I didn't give it its due on Sunday morning because it gets a little bit nerdy, and it's hard to say here this is good for you, but let's just jump in. I'm going to read it. So this is 1 Peter 3. I'll put a little box right there. For Christ also suffered. 1 Peter 3, verse 18 through the end. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous. I believe this is the ESV. That he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. So he was put to death in the flesh, dead, and alive in the spirit, in which is the actual Greek translation. Sometimes the NIV changes it. He went and proclaimed, the word here is preached, proclaimed, told them things, said things to them, to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as the removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him, in submission to him. Now, here's one of those where you go, what in the world? So you have Jesus and you have him going to these imprisoned spirits and making a proclamation to them, telling them something, and that this is one of those things because they didn't obey. And when didn't they obey? Well, that seems to be sometime around Noah and the ark with the water and the flood. And the flood helps kind of foreshadow baptism. And baptism, if you just read it like straight across here, which corresponds to this, and now that saves you, like that baptism saves you, which isn't exactly what we'll get into. As you get into it, then you see that it's through the resurrection of Jesus Christ that you are saved, not through the baptism itself. But then it's ends with things are in submission to him. And so all of this breeds forth the question of, okay, I can kind of understand within the context of why submission and subjection, that Christ has total control over those things, that he is the ultimate one that is everybody is underneath. Given the statements that Peter just said in the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, that we should be submissive to the ruling authorities, that household servants should be submissive, that wives should be submissive, and men in the same way for all of the women in their household. When we pull back this, you go, okay, that's a lot of weird stuff here about these prison spirits and who are these spirits and where are they imprisoned, and then you have to step back and go, okay, well, what can I do now is step back. Is this mentioned anywhere else in the book of 1 Peter? Well, not really, but is it mentioned anywhere else in the New Testament? Yes, indeed it is. 2 Peter. So here I'm gonna go back to our little box. 2 Peter. Here we go. 2 Peter, I believe this is chapter 2. And this is in the whole context of false teachers and stuff. So 2 Peter chapter 2, and I will say that the book of 2 Peter is different in context and style and flow in the Greek than the book of 1 Peter, but I believe that's because 1 Peter was with the help of Mark and Silas Silvanus, that they helped Peter polish these things together as they worked through Psalm 34 and the book of Isaiah and some of that stuff. Here we get to 2 Peter, and this is more just Peter himself. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, that there were angels that sinned. When did angels sin? You should ask that question. When did angels sin? We do know of this when we think along the times of the early days. So the beginning of Genesis. But let me just pause a second. So before I dig into this, there's something that you should understand, that in our modern context, especially in a reformed purview, we think that there is a singular fall, which there is, and that is the one thing that is the problem with humanity. But when you look at that from a, let's call it a Jewish or an Old Testament Torah-centered, Genesis-centered purview, that is your worldview, then you begin to see, yes, there is Genesis fall, as in Adam and Eve in the garden, which Paul picks up later and says that Christ is now the second Adam, the one that restores all things, rather than just the first Adam who brings such fall. But then you also get this thing in there where after you get the lineage of people, then you get this struggle where the daughters of men and the sons of God. Now there's a whole lot of weird interpretations. I am of the purview that this means the angels, as Peter here, that those that have a free will of their own can choose things that they desire, chose to desire the daughters of men. And then we get the struggle of, then the world begins to have serious problems. Not only the problem of sin in the beginning, but the precipitation and multiplication of that sin, which then gets compounded by the daughters of men and the sons of God, as in the angels coming down, cohabitating, and then we get the whole Nephilim, Rephaim, and all that stuff. I got a video of that if you really want to see that. Maybe I'll put a little bubble somewhere that you can find where I preach through some of that stuff. But you get this divine counsel kind of worldview aspect. So you have three big things that happen. One was the fall with Adam and Eve. Sin enters the world. 2, you get the daughters of men and the sons of God begin to cohabitate, and the natural order of things that God desired begins to shift. God then sends the flood with Noah and his family, saved through the waters, as in baptism, on the ark. And then the third one that we see is the Tower of Babel incident, where you see the struggle happen of everybody starts coming together and they want to build this tower towards the heavens to show how great they are. And God scatters them. And within Deuteronomy 32, maybe, I think. Deuteronomy 32 tells you that as the Jews look back, they said that was when God scattered the nations and gave them to the powers, or the sons of God, and that they got to have control. So you see these aspects of Daniel having a prince over a certain area, and prince of Persia, and the archangel Michael and Gabriel that are for Jerusalem and Judea and Israel and the people of Israel. That you see this struggle between the nations are all joined together at the Tower of Babel. God scatters them, gives them to the sons of God, those that are the authorities over them, but keeps Israel as his own possession. So those are the three things that you have to keep in mind. We normally only think about the fall individually, but this is the fall, this is the flood incident, and the Tower of Babel incident. These three big components factor in. You can see the reversal of the Tower of Babel incident at Pentecost. So you can see a number of these coming together. Let's jump back into 2 Peter. 2 Peter, voila. For God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell. This is the ESV version. The Greek here says Tartarus. That this is when you think of Greek mythology, this is the scary place of the nether region. So within the biblical worldview, there is a place called Sheol in the Old Testament Hebrew, or Hades in the New Testament Greek, and that just means the place of the dead, that's the dead place where people go, not hell per se. Here, when it talks about Tartarus, this is the lowest nether region of the place of the dead, that this is the lowest level of Hades, that this is the bad place to be in. So you could maybe call it hell, although hell, I don't want to get way off in the weeds, but hell, other than the context where Jesus has the conversation with Abraham in the bosom and Lazarus, hell seems to be, biblically speaking, a future tense sort of thing at the new creation of the new heavens, new earth, and then the lake of fire in which things are cast into. But here we see that they're angels, they sinned, and they were cast into Tartarus, and committed them to chains, that they were imprisoned in Tartarus of gloomy darkness and kept until the judgment. They are kept there, that isn't their ultimate place, until the judgment, as in the general resurrection. Everybody comes back from the dead because of Jesus' saving grace, because he is the new Adam, to bring everyone back to life for the judgment that some of us that believe will be empowered to stay and inhabit the new heavens and new earth, and those that do not will still bow, because every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. Many will because they want to, and many won't, because many will because they don't want to. I should rephrase that. Every single one of us bows. Doesn't matter who it is. Some will desire to do that, and some will desire not to do that. Those that desire not to, God will still empower to say, there's your spot. So here we jump back. So they're kept until the judgment, the resurrection. If he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, and 7 others, when he brought the flood upon the ungodly. And then it just keeps on going. So there's a lot more here. But what I want to point out here is Peter is saying the same thing again. So he's talking about angels that have been cast down into Tartarus because they did something wrong in the days of Noah, as in the days of Noah, what we talked about earlier, the sons of God and the daughters of men. You also find this same language. So we went from 1 Peter, where it talked about it, 2 Peter, where he gives more information and uses the exact same story because he parallels Noah again. And we get it in the book of Jude. When you get to the book of Jude, it's just one chapter. And there's a whole lot of stuff in there that makes you go, I don't quite understand. But here in the book of Jude, verse 5, he begins this by saying, now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. And this is talking about the journey through the wilderness and everything. And verse 6, and the angels who did not stay with their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling. Here we go. So this is the angels that did not stay where they were supposed to be, as in God's service, decided to do their own thing, leaving their proper place. He has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. And then he continues with Sodom and Gomorrah and sexual immorality, which should push you back at the very bottom there. Then it says, serve as an example by undergoing punishment of eternal fire. Now you go, oh my goodness, this is not present eternal fire. This is at the judgment there will be eternal fire. But for now, those people, specifically those angels, not people, those angels are kept in chains in darkness until the great day. You can even scroll down further, I believe. Let's see here. Yeah, verse 14. Here's where things get kind of dicey, and you get a little window into where we're going. It was also about these that Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment on all, and to convict all the ungodly of their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and all harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So this is Jude is also addressing false teachers within the church. And what he's pointing out here is an Enoch, the seventh from Adam, the one that prophesied, Enoch as in from Genesis, where he was taken to be with God. We don't have any words that he has. Where are we getting these things from? And we know here it says, and he will come with 10,000 of his holy ones. Holy ones, as in the ones that are the sons of God, that are the ones that inhabit the powers and principalities, the one that God has authority over. Here we see that Enoch is doing that. Where is this coming from? Well, for those of us that live in the modern context, we have the Old Testament, we have the New Testament, and we don't have anything else other than that. If you have a Bible that has an Apocrypha in the middle of it, you may get some other books. You get the Maccabees, which are a lot of history, and it tells you the story of Hanukkah. But there's also a book in there, and there's multiple parts of it, is the Book of Enoch. I will tell you that some of this stuff gets insanely bizarre as you go through the Book of Enoch, because the Book of Enoch is kind of like stuff that you would read in the weird parts of Ezekiel and Isaiah, mixed with the crazy stuff that you read in the book of Revelation, and you go, I don't know how to interpret any of this stuff. Well, the reason that you don't know how to is because it wasn't written to you specifically. It's written for you, but not specifically to you, because you are not the present context. And as you go through those things, like in the Book of Enoch, you go, I don't get all the imagery. I don't understand all this stuff. But what we can grasp is some of the things from that. Let me see here. I think I have a tab that has some Book of Enoch. Okay, so this is the Book of Enoch, and chapter 13, first Enoch. So I think there's 4 Enochs, and they just get bizarre and bizarre. What I will tell you is many Jews held them as authoritative within their life, not as in the same level of the Torah, the first 5 books, or not at the same level as the prophets, but within the writings tradition. So within the writings, then you get Proverbs, Psalms, some of those things where you go, oh, well, these things help in a way to help us interpret. This is in kind of an odd genre of a little bit apocalyptic, a little bit historical, a little bit of trying to explain things that happened through the Old Testament lens that maybe was more midrash or oral tradition. So here we have somebody writing the Book of Enoch. It's probably not Enoch. We know that he was taken up in the very, very early days. So this is somebody writing these things down. This is all the stuff, and I'm just going to go through a few little bits and pieces here. These are the things that are in the purview, that are on the mind and the lens of Peter and Jude and the New Testament church that would come from a Jewish worldview. Here we go. So at the beginning of chapter 3, it says, Then Enoch, passing to Azazel, yeah, I think that's how you say that. This is him going to these imprisoned spirits. Thou shalt not obtain peace. A great sentence is gone forth against thee. He shall bind thee. Neither shall relief, mercy, supplication be thine on account of the oppression that thou hast taught. So let me... On account of every act. So here's some of the acts. On account of every act of blasphemy, tyranny, sin, which thou hast discovered in the children of men. Then I departed from him, and I spoke to them all together. So this is Enoch traveling to this Tartarus place, talking to them. Because what happens earlier is they ask him, Enoch, come and go and plead to the Lord for us. Ask him for mercy. And he comes back and he goes, and I come back proclaiming to them, no mercy. What you did is not okay. You knew that it was not allowed. You will not be able to. And now when you go through the Book of Enoch, there's a number of things where they also call them the Watchers rather than the sons of God. When you read through that, then it gives a number of things that the Watchers did during that kind of struggle time before the flood with Noah, after the fall with Adam and Eve. The things that they taught the people on the world how to do, things that led to their destruction rather than led to their glorification. So here we have the context of Enoch goes down to tell them the judgment. No, God's not releasing you yet. Like, you're going to stay. You go further in chapter, I think it's 14. And you get a little more of this context here. We get in 14 verse 3-ish. Judgment has been passed upon you. Your request will not be granted. From this time forward, never shall you ascend into heaven. He has said that on the earth he will bind you for as long as the world endures. But these things that you shall behold the destruction of your beloved sons, you shall not possess them. They shall fall before you on the sword. Okay, you get the gist here. So the context here is Enoch, who is the prophet of prophets, goes to the imprisoned spirits down in Tartarus. They are in prison. You see here that they are said to be bound, and they are told you do not get out until, what does it say here? Until, what was the wording? Until, no, where did it go? He will bind you as long as the world endures. Because what happens is new heavens, new earth. When the I don't want to call it another flood, but as the flood wiped things out, then when God recreates everything or renews everything, as Romans 8, all creation groans for restoration, that everything gets restored as God desires it, that's when they get let out. When they get let out, it's not to inhabit that new world, but to be cast into the lake of fire, that fiery eternal punishment, or that's for another time. So let's go back to 1 Peter 3. Let me just kind of recap a little bit. You have 1 Peter 3, 2 Peter, 2 Peter 2, and the book of Jude. And they're all talking about this story of Enoch and going down to those that are imprisoned in Tartarus in chains. And you have to ask the question, why were they using that? Well, that was in their minds of something that happened. Now, just like you see Paul use Adam language with Jesus, that Jesus is the new Adam that then affects everything, or even the idea of the Passover lamb and Christ and the crucifixion. You get to see a number of these things, the Exodus story throughout. You get to see a number of these things where it is more like a typology, where you go just like this, or how Hebrews uses Melchizedek as an order of royal priesthood, that you begin to see Jesus is the ultimate royal priest. Here, I think what Peter and Jude are saying is that Jesus is the ultimate Enoch. Like if Enoch is this mythical figure that we know nothing about other than this book that traveled around. I mean, if you can imagine how fast like Harry Potter stuff kind of traveled throughout the world because it was a great story, the Book of Enoch is like bizarre and odd, and you go, oh, that explains things. Like, am I saying that it is authoritative? No. Like, I can't say that. But what I can say is the early church looked to it as something that was helping their interpretation of what was going on now and the story of Jesus within the early context of the early church of the first century. So here we go back. Peter jumps in and talks about Christ suffered, righteous for unrighteous. But then what does he do is he goes and he makes proclamation to the spirits that are in prison, the imprisoned, the spirits that are in Tartarus, that are in chains. He clarifies that in his second letter, that he goes and proclaims to them. Remember what Enoch did in his book. Enoch goes down to tell them, nope, God said you're not getting out. So here we see Jesus going down. This is a lot of where you go, how come the Apostles' Creed says he descended into hell? The reality is it says in the Greek he descended into Hades, into the dead place. Why did he go down there where everybody has all the speculation? Here we find that Peter is saying he goes down to Tartarus through the context of 1 Peter, 2 Peter, and a bit of Jude, just like Enoch did, but as the ultimate Enoch, as the ultimate one, just like Paul would say, the second Adam claims everything again, just like sin fell through one, how much more grace abounds through the other. Here we see Jesus going down and saying like, you thought you won. ain't happening. Like that there is a little bit of like Jesus going on and making the ultimate authority decision. Why is that interesting? We'll get to the end. So let's keep reading. So in which, through the Spirit, he goes down and he proclaims to the spirits in prison. And why? Because they didn't obey. We already have the context of who they are. Those are the ones from the early Genesis account before the flood. Baptism, which corresponds to this, corresponds to the flood that happened, wiping out the world other than Noah and his family, now saves you. Not that thing itself now saves you, but that God saves you. God saved Noah and his family through the washing away of all the things that were evil and bringing to life the things that are good. Now saves you not as the removal of dirt, not taking a bath, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience. Now, here's where things get a little goofy. In the Greek, the word appeal isn't like, well, I just decide to, but more like pledge, more like affirmation, more like statement of the affirmative that says, I am in. This is a claiming thing. And then of good conscience, or an appeal to God for a good conscience. This isn't like Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket, that this is a little something whispered in your ear telling you to do good things. But of good conscience would be more like, in the Greek, the mindset would be more of a loyal appeal decision. So here we see these words, play on words coming together, that there is a pledge to God to have a decision for him. That this is, we are saying we are for you. Not that you can tell us good things and bad things like Jiminy Cricket, but that we have said we are for you. In the New Testament context, you would see this in the early believers that are saying no to the world, especially the Gentile world. We are saying no to those things, as you see further in 1 Peter 4, where it says, in your former life of debauchery and all of that, when you lived in that kind of Greco-Roman worldview, you have now put that to death in the water of baptism. We also see that affects the families as they go through, because you see the Philippian jailer and Cornelius and the households that are baptized into that it is now a whole family that is moving forward into something. So it is baptism that saves you. Well, how does it save you? It's not the removal of the dirt, but is that pledge that you and your family have through. This is vitally important. All throughout Paul and throughout Peter, everywhere, you see through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is not you on your own petitioning, but only because Christ. So it is only through, as you go through something, that allows you to happen, allows it to happen. So much like you wouldn't even be able to see if your eyes get bad unless you have glasses on, or if you had a blinder on, it is only once that thing is pulled away that you can see through whatever it was. That was a really bad analogy. The point I'm making here is it's not because you want to, it's not because you deserve to, it's not because you have that appeal to God for a good conscience, that you have that pledge to loyalty, but it is because of Christ's resurrection that you are enabled to do those things. It is always through Christ, in Christ, that you find any sort of concept of salvation or election. Everything is through Christ, in Christ. This is where I tend to lean more vastly towards a Bardian view of election and chosenness. But then you get to the next part. Okay, back to 1 Peter. You get to verse 22, and here's where he lets you know how much he's been influenced by this Enoch stuff. Through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God. Gone into heaven as in gone into Hades. He's not in Hades. He is in heaven. He is in the realm where God dwells. At the right hand of God is in the place of authority that you read through at the beginning of Psalms, with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. That everything is in subjugation, in submission, is ordered underneath, to hear underneath Christ. That means the imprisoned spirits. That means the good stuff, the bad stuff. Everything is underneath Christ. Why is that important? Because what he's saying here is that every single baptism, every single claim that a person or a family is moving toward a covenant relationship with God, saying, I pledge this, I am totally in, that I am going to be loyal to this, not like a moral kind of weirdness of Pinocchio, that if I'm not good, then I won't get to become a real boy. Like, there is some interesting play on words there, and imagery of Pinocchio versus the resurrected state of people, that you get to actually become something real and not something that you really were not, but what you were really intended to be. Anyway, every baptism, every single one, is another claim against the powers, principalities, authorities, things that the world struggles against, the imprisoned spirits, the leader of those imprisoned spirits, the Ha-Satan, the accuser, that against all of them, every single one is reclaiming victory for the kingdom, saying, you just wait. You just wait, because our God is great. What you thought was a win for you was not. It was the ultimate victory for him and us through him. Okay. That's a little bit of Climbing the Labyrinth, biblical edition. We've made it through 1 Peter, 2 Peter, Jude, into the Book of Enoch. I just gave you a few little excerpts of kind of the things. You can read the Book of Enoch online. We've made it through. Baptism is the statement against the enemy that Christ has won, that we are fighting with him, through him. So when you get back to these sections, when you read through 1 Peter or 2 Peter or Jude, and you go, where is this coming from? Then you know that not only were they first century Jews and first century Christians and converts to following the way, but they also had books that they were reading that were authoritative to them in some sort of meaningful way. Not necessarily like we would think of the Old Testament, but in a similar way that we would think of things that are beneficial, things that seem to be circulating. So yeah, made it through. Till next time.